Alright, so this is the Aurelian Soul items, runes, and some. So we're going to go through them all and kind of explain them. So first off, for your starting items, you basically have three choices, which are Doran's Ring 2 potions, Tear 2 potions, or Corrupting Pot. So Tear is like the best start by far. If you can get away with Tear, you want to go this, but there's some situations where you might want to go something else. Situation one is if you need to go Corrupting Pot. So if you're against really heavy poke to the point where if you start tier and two potions, you're just going to lose too much over the lane in that you have to buy refillable. You're not going to be able to pick catalyst up on your first base, all that sort of stuff. It's going to be really hard to start tier with two potions. So if you're against something like a Syndra or an Azir or any of those sorts of champs, you're going to want to take TP and Corrupting Potion, and that's going to help sustain all that extra damage. Doran's Ring, you can start Doran's Ring if you want a stronger earlier like lane. Also, if you need extra max HP earlier, so if you're against an assassin that spikes extremely hard early, it can be a choice. A lot of the time though, versus assassins, they don't actually spike until level 6, so you can get away with just tier and 2 potions and then get catalyst at level 6. So I would say I don't like normally start Doran's Ring. I'm almost always going tier 2 potions or corrupting pot. But we'll talk about this in the builds later. If you're planning on not buying a tier in your build at all, then obviously you don't want to start tier, and you'd probably be better off starting Doran's Ring as your greedier option. So basically, default to tier. If it's a hard poke matchup, go Corrupting Potion. If you want really strong early game or you're skipping tier, go for Doran's Ring. So for your early buys, if you didn't start tier, obviously, and you're building it, you're going to want to pick it up pretty early. Next is refillable. So refillable can be kind of a bait. You don't want to pick this up unless you actually need the sustain, like because it can just end up being a waste of gold. At the same time, if you are like getting poked down, if you're having trouble staying like relatively high HP, it's a relatively small investment and you can always sell it back later. So I would say like if I'm looking for something early game and I don't have enough gold for one of the bigger items like a chapter or a catalyst, something like tier, refillable dark seal on a first base is completely fine to me, but it really depends like on how much gold you base on. Dark Seal, you want to pick this up pretty much every single game as an AP champion. It's just too efficient not to. If like you don't want to screw over your base for it, right? Like if you have enough gold to buy a chapter and you don't buy it because you want to buy a Dark Seal, like that's in my opinion not worth it. But I think like if you ever get a chance during the game where you just base on awkward gold or you just have a little bit left over, Dark Seal is probably the best item in the game to pick up. It's just insanely efficient. It's even efficient on 0 stacks. So it's an insane item and pretty much every AP should be buying it. Next is boots. So most of the time on asol, when we get to the runes, you'll be taking magical footwear, so you won't really need to go boots. But it's another item where if you base with awkward gold, you can just fill in with buying boots. But I think most lanes you don't really, you'll be taking magical boots, so it's not going to be a big issue. Now next is like kind of your bigger ticket items if you base with more gold. So if you're rushing Rod of Ages, then Catalyst is going to be your ideal pickup. This is extremely good against really difficult poke lanes, as well as against assassins, because it does a great job of giving you max HP, which makes it harder for assassins to kill you, and it also gives you a lot of sustain, so poke champions can't really get you down, and also assassins won't be able to drop you below very high HP. So basically, this is an excellent item and neutralizing your lane. The key word being neutralizing. It doesn't do much for you offensively. It's mainly just to make sure you can keep scaling. And asol scales very well. So like a lot of the time that can be fine. But if you want to like bully your lane, if you want to increase like your stacks and stuff, this isn't really the item you want to go for. And if that is the case, most likely you're building Leandries instead, and then you're really going to want to pick up a Lost Chapter. I've put Codex here because it's like a decent item to pick up if you've already got like these items and you don't have gold for a chapter, but the reality is like early game, your goal as asol is just to stack up really fast, right? Like you want to make sure you have the AP and the mana and the CDR to just drop an E on every wave, queue it all down, just farm 6 out of 6 creeps on every wave. So like Lost Chapter is your ideal, but a lot of the time like you won't have gold, so you can buy these other items. And then yeah, if you're in any sort of difficult matchup, you should probably be rushing Rod of Ages, as we'll talk about in a bit. Now the last one is Merc Treads. So Merc Treads I think are kind of a bait on asol. Like they're good, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the matchups where you want this, you're better off just building Catalyst instead. So Merctrez is extremely good against double AP mid jungle, especially ones where the tenacity is good against. So it's good against champs like Zoe, LeBlanc, Syndra, you know, all these types of champs where they're both like AP and CC. It can also be really good if they have an AP jungler as well. So stuff like Elise, Merctrez are really good against. A lot of the time though, you're going to find that if you go like just a straight Merctrez, it's gonna actually put you further behind because it makes it difficult for you to stack up on the wave. Like you lose the mana, you lose the AP, so it's difficult to kind of keep your stacks going, and you can actually end up falling further behind. So like if you really need Merc Treads, you should buy them, but if possible, you should just get away with Catalyst, or even greedier, just go Chapter. But it's kind of matchup dependent, and at the same time, if you're gonna die because you didn't buy Merc Treads, then you're better off buying Merc Treads. So boot options, 99% of the time, I think you go Sork Shoes or Merc Treads. Sork Shoes, they're just the best item on ASOL, like damage-wise. You don't really need CDR that much, and it's tempting to want to go defensive boots because a lot of the time you do end up like, kind of chasing people down and like sort of in the thick of the fight. But at the same time, most of the times you start the fight, it's using E and R, and then you're kind of chasing people down with WQ, so you don't actually like need the tenacity. Like you're deceptively long ranged on this champ. So again, like if you need Merc Treads, like you can go for them, but if you can get away with Sork Shoes, you should. And then CDR boots are kind of trash on ASOL in my opinion. It's good for summoner spell haste, which is nice, but ability haste on ASOL kind of sucks. And like, yeah, I think Summoner Spell also isn't amazing because it's not like you have like a big flash combo. So you can buy it again if your gold is really awkward, but I'd not really recommend it. Moving on to your standard build. So we have two builds. One which is the... Oh my god, how did I do that? One which is the Liandry's build, and one which is the Rod of Ages build. So basically, Rod of Ages is really good if you're versus like champs that have a lot of threat onto you, especially short range champs, like if you verse champs like Zed or Fizz, or even a lot of the bruisers, stuff like perhaps like Riven. It can be really, really good. Obviously, it makes you tankier. It's like definitely built towards the battle mage style, and it makes your defensive laning a lot better because you're going to get Catalyst for the early game, right? Liandry's, though, is definitely more damage. You normally get more stacks with it as well because you can clear waves earlier. And in a way, it's actually better for lane, even though like Catalyst is normally better for chapter for lane. Just the way ASOL works, like being able to just like EQ the wave, having more AP makes it so you can kind of start wave clearing and like not really interacting with your opponent earlier. So that's like a general rule. If you're versus assassins or really difficult matchups, go for Rod of Ages. If you're versus like lots of health stackers or like a even or a relatively easy matchup, then Liandry's is going to be better. Past that, it's pretty normal. Obviously, make sure that if you are buying a tier in these builds, like I see I've got tier in both these builds, that you are picking up tier before this. But what's interesting is that you don't actually need to complete your tier until third item. And the reason for that is because, well, obviously you get your boots, but Rylai's is an insanely broken item on ASOL. It's like by far his best item. So while you can complete Archangels before Rylai's, I wouldn't really recommend it. This gives you like an insane spike. And also, Archangels kind of acts as a pseudo Rabadons in this build because the thing is, if you're building Rylai's, you have a bit less AP than you normally do. So a third item Rabadons isn't as good as it is on the other champs. And actually, Archangels will be giving you, it'll be giving you less AP, but in terms of its price, it's probably comparable as your third item. So most of these builds, I would just go something like this. And obviously there'll be situational items, which I'll talk about down here. But these are basically your standard builds. These are like your highest DPS builds. And really the only thing you need to think about too much is which mythic you're going for. And after that, it kind of plays itself. And obviously we're just like rounding out the build with Rabadons and Void. This is, of course, if you don't have situational items. So we'll get to that. Your alternative mythics, we've kind of just already talked. It really is just between these two. I think Luden sucks on this champ. Well, it doesn't suck, but it's just not as good as the others. Crown is kind of just worse than Rod of Ages, in my opinion. Everfrost also just like worse than these options. So there's not really anything else you can buy other than this. So those are your two options as we talked about. So situational items, there's a lot of them. And we'll kind of talk about like where they fit in the build as well. So the first one is Medjai's. So Medjai's is pretty good on ASOL because you can normally get a lot of stacks because you're AoE and you have enough range that if you play well, you shouldn't really lose too many stacks. At the same time, this is just an inherently risky buy, right? Like if you like buy this and immediately lose the stacks, you're really, really far behind. So be careful when you buy it because especially if you verse point and click lockdown, like for example, if you verse something like a Vi, this can be really bad to buy. Or if you're buying this and you don't have flash and they have like a Vagar and you don't have cleanse or something, that can be really scary. Basically, when you buy this, you need to think, like, is there a high chance I die? If there is, just don't buy it. If you're pretty certain you won't die as long as you play like somewhat like a human, then Medjai's is like fine to buy, in my opinion. Actually, it's like a really good item. It's very cheap, very efficient, but it just like carries some risk with it. Next thing is Oblivion Orbs. So you have to actually be very careful with buying this on asol because no matter, like a lot of other champions, right? You can buy this early and it delays your mythic, and that's annoying, but that's all it delays, right? Asol, each of his spikes are insanely important. Like, okay, mythic, obviously amazing, right? And then like the Rylai's second item that like changes your kit completely. Past that, like these items are the one that actually give you the big AP. So buying this on asol, it's a significant commitment. So it has to be really damn worth it. Admittedly, again, because you have a lot of AoE, you can apply Grievous Wounds to a lot of people, and it's quite effective. But if you buy this at the wrong time, it's like really fucking bad. So the only time I've really considered buying this is when I'm versus something like Silas. But versus Silas, I normally just take Ignite. So I guess if you really need healing reduction, like they have a Soraka and a bunch of other melees that heal, and no one on your team is putting healing reduction, you can buy it, but it's like a last resort. Like all these items are way better. Next is Void. So Void is in every one of my builds because, at least in Halo, people tend to itemize correctly and buy a lot of MR. If you find in your games that people aren't really building a lot of MR, you can actually just replace Void with something else completely, which we'll talk about. And also, the time you pick up Void is very situational. Like, normally, what I do is I just buy Void as soon as I see them start building MR. Like, I guess sometimes you might need it second, like here, but I would really like. I don't know. It feels really bad. I think I probably wouldn't ever build it until after I've built Rylai's. Again, it kind of feels bad to build it as like your third item in here, but sometimes you just have to because they have so much magic resist. So kind of like, yeah, just trying to evaluate their comp. Basically, you just need to. I would say as long as you're after Rylai's, it's like fine to buy it and just like look at their comp and see how much MR they have. Normally, if they only have like 20 MR each, it's not a huge like importance. But if it's stuff like, three of them have Merc Treads, someone has a Wit's End, someone has like Hex Drinker, like now we really kind of start need to thinking about buying Void. Next is Zhonya and Banshee. So these are both your defensive items. Similar to Void, these can kind of just slot in your build kind of wherever. So if you really need a Zhonya's early, you can even put it before your Rylai's. Generally though, I would tend not to buy these items too much on asol until after I've at least completed 3 items. And even then, you get so much more damage from other stuff that you should only buy it if you really need it. I think a lot of the time, if you need Zhonya's, you can just go Rod of Ages instead for the tank units. Like in my mind, it's much better to go like Rod of Ages and damage items than it is to go say Liandry's with Zhonya's. You know what I mean? Just because Zhonya's is like it slows down your build a lot, and obviously it's a very good item. Like if you're versus unavoidable damage, like something like Zed, Fizz can be another good one, Vi ult, Jarvan engage, this sort of stuff, it can be good. But again, it's a big DPS loss, so don't buy unless you really need it. Banshees, it's kind of the same boat. Like, if you need MR, normally I will go Merc Treads instead. Worth noting, though, that Merc Treads don't actually give much MR. Like, it's only worth buying if you also make use out of the Tenacity. If you just need Magic Resist and you don't need Tenacity, then you should go, like, Sork Shoes and Banshees instead. And similar to Zhonya's, just fit it in the build after Rylai's. Okay, and then Tear. So Tear itself is sort of a situational item. And the reason is that you don't actually need this on asol, but it kind of smooths out your build. So the problem you have is that because Rylai's doesn't give a ton of AP, going third item Rabadons is not as good as it is on a lot of other champions. And also, it's like obviously not giving any like HP or ability haste. Again, ability haste like isn't the end of the world. Health is like sort of nice though. It really depends on your comp, but yeah, initially I thought Tear was kind of a bait because you don't really need the mana and it does kind of like slow down your scaling. But when I started to see it as sort of like a pseudo Rabadon's replacement third item, but then also enabling me to have more AP for my Rabadon's fourth item, I decided it's kind of good on this champ. So yeah, if you want to skip this and just go say, what would we go? Like Liandry's, Sorks, Rylai's, Rabadons, or like Roa, Sorks, Rylai's, Rabadons, like you can definitely do that. But it's cheap, and I think it smooths out your scaling quite a bit, so it can be nice. Lichbane, so you guys are probably looking at this and going like, "Shuck, are you dumb? Like, you're never going to auto attack on this champ," and you're completely correct. The only time I've ever bought Lichbane on asol is ultra late game. You can sell your boots and use just for the movement speed. Obviously, it's giving more AP, so it synergizes really well with like Rabadons and stuff. But you're really just buying it for the movement speed. And yeah, you only buy like ultra late game. I think I've only bought this like twice on asol in my whole life. Another option, I guess, there is Cosmic, but it gives less movement speed total, and it just gives you more movement speed if you can like damage people. So I prefer the Lichbane, but both of them are kind of whatever. And finally, the Morello upgrade over Oblivion Orb. I think this item sort of just sucks. Like, it gives Magic Pen, which is great, but it's always going to do less damage than the other items you can buy. And if you need Healing Cut, you're probably better off just having this. I guess, like, Ultra Late Game, you can upgrade it if there's nothing else to buy. But even then, you might just be better off selling it and buying another damage item, because it might just be more effective. So I'm not, like, a huge fan, to be honest, but yeah, I guess it's something you can consider, but I don't even think I've built this a single time on asol. I think I built Oblivion Orb before, but yeah, I think Merlot kind of sucks. Let's take a look at the runes. So there's like a couple rune pages that are good. This is kind of your default rune page, in my opinion, as asol. So First Strike is like the best scaling rune. It's really nice, gives you a lot of gold in the mid game, and also the inspiration tree is just really good for scaling. Like either magical footwear or perfect timing allows you to save gold. I pretty much always go magical footwear. But I guess if you really need a stopwatch, you can consider that. Here, you can go either futures or DMAT. So DMAT can be good for getting creeps lower, or like making them easier to CS, sorry, which is, again, good for stacking. I find that it's more useful to have futures because I feel like getting a good first base in this champ is sort of hard. Like getting a full chapter or a full catalyst is pretty difficult for a champ that's not super strong in early lane. So I much prefer the futures, but it's up to you. Like either one of these is, in my opinion, fine with me. And then Cosmic, it's kind of the only one here that's really good. Another keystone you can consider an inspiration is actually Spellbook. So if you're versus a difficult range matchup to where you can never proc First Strike, so something really long range like a Victor, I would consider going Spellbook instead. Or if you're versus an Assassin that's hard countered by swapping to something like Exhaust at level 6 or like Barrier, it can be really good. So I default to First Strike, but if I play against stuff like Talon, Zed, Kiana, or really long range champs, Victor, Azir, then I'll be looking to go Spellbook instead, because you're just not going to get much value out of First Strike. For your secondary runes with this, you have lots of choices. Personally, I just go for this, like max scaling. You don't really need mana flow on this champ, so don't worry about that. And Transcendence also sort of sucks on this champ, because you don't, use the ability haste that well. You can also consider like scaling tankiness if you really feel like it. Like if you need conditioning overgrowth, if you feel like you're going to be a bit closer range in fights, that's an option as well. And then you can kind of mix and match the resolve tree based on the lane. So like, for example, if we go in Spellbook, difficult lane, maybe versus like a hard poke champ, we might want Sank Wind. If we're versus an all-in champ, like a Zed Kiana, we can go Bone Plating. If we wanted more tenacity, I suppose you could go on flinching, although I would probably just take cleanse instead. So there's lots of options. Personally, this is like my default build here, but Spellbook is certainly an option. And then down here, if you feel like the wave is going to be really contested, like both of you are pushing a lot, or it's a melee that you can auto a lot, attack speed can be nice. It also helps you just like prepping the creeps. This is really just personal preference. I normally just go with more AP because I think it makes it a little bit easier to stack, but lane dependent, you can take this. Honestly though, it's like not a big deal whatsoever. And the last thing I want to quickly comment on is that some people go Comet on this champ, and in my opinion, it just sort of sucks. So the reason is that Comet is like very good for the lane, right? Like if you take something like Comet Scorch, it's much stronger early game. The thing is, you can't really ever like hard poke people out on asol. It just doesn't really work, right? Like I don't think the way you win trades is normally by poking. Like most of the time, you'll be using your cooldowns on the wave to stack, or if someone trades with you, you'll just be spamming Q on them. So that just doesn't really fit Comet's playstyle. If you're gonna go this, you could kind of think of it almost as like a defensive rune in a way, that like it makes the trades a bit better for you. Like if you're versus something really hard like Syndra, right, and you don't want to go Spellbook, you could go Comet almost as like a deterrent to say like, okay, you can't trade on me because I can trade back pretty heavily. The problem is, I think this should only really work against bad players, and I just don't really like it. I feel like if the Syndra plays properly, she shouldn't get hit by the comments. She should still be able to play around you by like, just like saving her stun for your Q and stuff like that. So in my mind, this is perhaps good if you're in lower elo and you just want a bit stronger laning power, but I really feel like the other runes, First Strike or Spellbook, are so much better. So I would go for one of those and then just like mix and match with your secondaries based on like the matchup and what you think you need. Just one last thing, some people have gone for something a bit mixed. For example, like Taste of Blood plus Ultimate Hunter. I have thought about this, but I don't really like it as a whole. So Ultimate Hunter is sort of a bait on this champ because while casting your ult more often gets you more stacks, a lot of the time the CDR will be wasted because you won't be using it on cooldown or because you'll just be holding the empowered ult. So if you know how asol stacks work, you know that when you get like the ult fully charged, you kind of want to hold it for like a dragonfly or something, right? So all that time, the ultimate ability haste won't actually be working. I guess you could go something like Treasure Hunter, or you go like Treasure Hunter Eyeball for more scaling, but at that point, you might as well just go like this, or the Resolve Tree as well. So yeah, I hope you kind of see my reasoning for the runes. And if you don't really agree, I mean, feel free to message me, happy to discuss it, but I kind of think these are the best. And the last thing I'll quickly talk about is the sums. So 90% of the time, you're going to want Flash DP on asol, I would say. Other things you can consider are Flash Exhaust, very good against Assassins. Flash Cleanse, very good against stuff like Lissandra or even stuff like LeBlanc. Although, versus like LeBlanc, normally I prefer Mercs. Like, you don't really want to take Cleanse unless you can't play the game without it. Because like Flash TP or Flash... Yeah, Flash TP is like definitely the best scaling. Like Flash Exhaust was something like Spellbook. If you go... Like, okay, if you're versus an Assassin, you go like Flash Exhaust, you take Spellbook to swap to TP or other combat sums, you go like bone plating in your runes and you take catalyst as well, you build catalyst, you're literally unkillable. So yeah, that's like an ideal setup. But for me, 90% of games, Flash TP, assassin matchups, Flash Exhaust. Otherwise, pretty much that's it. I guess sometimes I go like Flash Ignite versus Silas, just because it's like a deterrent for him trading on me. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much everything for items, runes, and sums. Let me know what you guys think.